The lectures which will follow are primarily on information gathering. Information gathering is a very important part of any systems analysis and design process, because you cannot actually arrive at a systems requirement statement or system requirement specifications, as it is called, SRS document, unless you have all the information which an organization has. And primarily the reason why we look at it is to make sure that the correct requirements are determined. So, this particular talk will have a number of parts. First, we will talk about strategy to gather information. What are the methods which we will use to gather information, and using this, how will we arrive at a systems requirements specification, and classify these requirements into operational, tactical and strategic information, because as we have been continuously pointing out, all the three are very important, and most organizations seem to be quite satisfied with arriving at operational system, and they do not really look at very carefully the use of that system for tactical and strategic operations. In other words, based on the operational information, you arrive at these types of information which aids the middle and top management, and that effectively is the one which gives the profit to the company. So, one should not really stop with the operational information system, because that is unfortunately even today in many organizations they seem to think that once they come up with an operational goal and have an operational system going, so that the day to day operations of the organization go on without interruption with the aid of computers, they are satisfied, and they do not seem to think what further use can be made of this. And that is one of the reasons why I want to emphasize right at the systems requirement specification stage these types of information also, so that these goals are clear to you and clear also to the management. So, as you proceed, you always make sure that at the end of the process of creating the SRS, these are also created and made known to the management. Why motivation means why should we talk about this at all? The primary goal of information systems is to meet certain requirements of the end user of the organization. So, end users requirements are the primary reasons why the information system is being designed. So, if that be the case, then we have to make sure and obtain from the end user what he thinks the information system will provide. In other words, from the end user there is a certain expectation, and the expectation has to be fulfilled by the system which you design, and in order to do that, the designer must gain complete knowledge of the organization's working. Unless he get a complete knowledge of the organization's working, it will not be easy for him to come up with a proper system. Like suppose you are going to a hospital to create an information system for them, you have to know what the hospital management expects at the end of this computerization phase. So, you have to be able to fulfill that expectation. It is important for students to know what are the techniques to gather information, so that no information is overlooked and the nature and functions of organizations are clearly understood. In other words, what I really mean by that is the technique must be such that you don't miss certain aspects of the system requirements, and you also clearly understand the functions. See, what really hurts systems designers most is that very often people who work in organizations regularly assume certain things because they work with it day in and day out, and they don't state that very clearly. They don't state it because they think everybody knows it. So, what hurts this analyst most is what is assumed by the user to be known to everybody, which you don't know because you are new to the organization. And unless you ask that question, have you left out something which is obvious to you but not necessarily obvious to me, okay, and get that. See, so what hurts most is what is unstated, not what is stated. So, it is very important to be able to find out, or what is called ferreting out or mining out from the in the information gathering stage all the aspects, both which are stated and which are implied and which are not stated explicitly. So, as I said, the main purpose is to determine the information requirements, and so as I said, it is also not often stated precisely. In other words, there are two aspects. One is not stating at all, assuming that you know it. The other is, even when they state it, they don't state it very precisely. Like for instance, if you go and try to computerize a hospital, they say that it turns out that we have periods where there is a lot of beds which do get vacated, but we don't have information that the bed has been vacated, and so we cannot allot that bed to a new patient who comes in because we feel because we are not informed, we don't know, those beds go vacant, and a person doesn't come there, see. And instead of precisely saying all this very clearly, they say our problem is that there are always empty beds in the hospital. The question, why are the empty beds, has to come out from whatever system you design. So, they will similarly in a hotel, they will say we always find there are, at the end of the day, some days we think that the hotel is full, but we find that many rooms are vacant, which we could have actually allotted, and we did not allot because we did not have that proper information with us. Because many of the manual systems, there are links which are links by people, and one person is supposed to tell some other person, and that person forgets to tell. If he forgets to tell, the person who ought to know does not know it. Whereas in a computer based system, all these things, there is no question of will get automatically transmitted. The information will not, somebody will not forget, because as soon as something happens, he has to take some action. The action is forced by the computer, and once it is forced by the computer, then of course it will flow to the appropriate place. So, that is the major problem. In fact, later on we will see it again, because very often people do not state very clearly. In fact, there is a case study given in this book, which the analysis and design of information systems. The case study is about designing an information system for a student hostel. Again, in a student hostel, the warden apparently wants that computers are useful for actually running the hostel in a better way. Now, when he calls somebody to help him or assist him to computerize the operations, the only thing he will say is that I am told a computer can help in many ways in making the hostel run efficiently. Now, you have to really get out from him what are the problems currently he is facing. So, once you understand the problems he is facing currently, then you can explain that these are the ways in which machines will be able to help. So, that is the point. That is very often they do not state. So, that is brought out in the case study. Ultimately, as I said, there is, at the end of the fact gathering phase, the end product is the systems requirement specification document. So, SRS document is a very, very important document, because that is the document which is signed by both the management which asks for the system and the designer who promised to deliver the system. So, the SRS becomes, you might say, the basic contractual document on which the entire contract is drawn, saying that after the computerization of the company, these requirements which you stated will be met. And so, when you say these requirements will be met, the person who gave you the requirements can then check whether indeed system meets it or does not meet it, and he can, at that stage, he cannot talk about new requirements which is never put in the SRS. So, SRS must be complete in all respects. So, as far as the analyst and the company which is delivering the information system is concerned, their responsibility is only to fulfill the SRS. Something beyond that, which the user suddenly thinks about, is not part of the contract. So, to that extent, SRS should be tight. If it is kind of loose and things are left unstated, then there can be a dispute at the end of the entire process. And there have been many situations where the user thought something and the systems analyst thought something else, and so the two don't agree, and it goes into even an arbitration stage. There is one case 2 years ago when one company from India had contracted for a bank in Indonesia, and when these people went there and those guys said that you are not fulfilled and you have taken part of the money, and so they put them in jail, and there is a big furor. And so there are situations where it can be very tricky unless you have a very clear SRS drawn up and contract drawn up. It's a vital document. So, the main goals, learning goals, which we have for this set of lectures, is what is the strategy to gather information, what are the various sources from which you gather information, and how do you search for information. As I said, you have to mine or ferret out information from people, also not only from people, other things also which I will talk about. Interviewing techniques to gather information from line managers, top management. That is, in fact, one of the most important fact gathering methods is by personal interview. Personal interview is where you spend time with the user, talk to him or talk to her to find out what they need. And so, this in gathering of information is very important. And the point which will be made in the talks is that this information is not obtained only from the top management. Top management has got certain kind of overall perspective of the company and what they require. But then there are people down the line, in other words, second level managers who are people who are called line managers, and then the lower level managers and also the workers. The actual, for instance, in a hotel, it may be the desk clerk who ultimately has a terminal in front of him and he enters various things on it, or the accountant who creates a bill with that machine, or if you go to a hospital, it is ultimately the front reception desk which finally will give you the bill and things like that. So, the person who is going to operate the system is really not in the managerial cadre, but is in the working cadre, and the person in the working cadre, because they have a lot of experience and worked for the company for many years, they have a lot of things to tell you which the manager may not know, because day to day this is the person who is in the firing line in the sense of getting all the wrath of customers and facing all that problems and so on. So, he knows more about the problems of users or ultimate users of the system which you are going to design. So, he will have a lot of things to tell in terms of maybe even what not to do and what is to be done. So, one should not really ignore the lower level people, in the sense as working level people. That is true everywhere, including banks. If you go to a bank today, every bank teller has a machine in front, and all said and done, the teller is the one who operates the machine. And if the operational problem is difficult, the user interfaces are difficult, or what the person cannot understand very clearly, then your system will fail, because the person does not know how to use it. Okay. So, there is a need to look at the requirements, particularly the ease of use requirements of the people who are going to actually operate the machines. Now, what I mean by method of consensus for formulating requirements is that in any organization there are conflicting requirements and conflicting goals, and one has to arrive at some kind of a fully agreed upon set of requirements. Going back to my example of house building, there are conflicting requirements in terms of what a house should have. As I said, the mother may require a large kitchen, and a son may require a good computer room, and the grandfather may require a good puja room, and so on. So, there are, each person has got his own priorities, and what that person considers as his requirement or her requirement, and within the constraints of budget, time, and what is feasible, you got to arrive at the consensus. So, what is ultimately what can be done. So, each person has to do some give and take, and so you really have to arrive at some compromise. That is what is meant by consensus. Really implies some compromise of the requirements to ultimately come with something which can be met. Now, there are a number of tools which are used in the development of during the course of information gathering, and also as a part of the SRS document. These tools are called document flow diagram, which depicts the flow of documents in an organization. Like what I mean by documents in an organization is if you go to a hospital, one of the documents would be the patient's admission card, where the patient's name, details will be there, and whatever advance the person has paid will be there, and so on. So, that is a document, and that is a document which is created when the person first comes. Similarly, in a hotel, when a person registers to be a resident, a lot of information is taken from him, and that is really a document. And now, that document, how does it flow? That is important to know, because very often documents flow from place to place to place. Like particularly, for instance, if you take an organization there which receives a lot of items which goes into an inventory in the shop. Like for instance, if you take an example of a Food World or Food Mart kind of a thing, which is a retail store, when the items are delivered, there is delivery note which comes along with it, which gives the quantity and the price and stuff like that, and that has to go to the next level for processing and so on. So, documents are actually the very often manually written documents which physically flow from place to place, and of course with the networked world you try to minimize this what is called the paper use of paper, but all said and done paper use has not gone down, has not vanished. Paper is still used. So, very often a document with signature is considered more sacred or more important than just an entry on a machine. This is of course partly psychological, partly it is required for legal purposes. So, there is a document, it is always there. So, there is document flow in the system, and specification of operational, tactical and strategic information which will be provided, and there is another tool called data flow diagrams to specify the flow of computer records, that is records generated by computer, and the processing, what processing takes place, what kind of databases the processing step refers to, whether the database it has to read into the read from the database, or both read and write or update the database. These are things which are specified in the data flow diagram. So, data flow diagram is at a level which is more computer oriented than a document flow diagram, which is more at the level of the user oriented. In other words, what really is currently happening in the company or organization. Now, let us look at the strategies for gathering information. First of all, we have to identify information sources. What I mean by identifying information sources is there may be multiple information sources which may be there apart from the interviews. So, we will have to look at identify these things and evolve a method of obtaining information from these identified sources. How do you in other words, information sources, what are the sources, and then how do you get information from those sources. And there is something called information flow model of an organization to get an idea of how information actually flows in an organization, so that can be used. The main sources of information are users of system, like in an organization, or there are number of users of the particular system. There are two situations which one may encounter in practice. One situation is a situation where there is already a computer based system which is operational, and the management feels that that system which is operational is outdated. It requires changes and improvements. At the beginning it is all right for their purpose, but now they feel something can be done better. So, they want the system to be replaced with a new type of a system, or ab initio. In other words, nothing is there and you start from scratch. Starting from scratch is sometimes more easy, but because you can use the most modern technology, but that is not always the case. For instance, what I mean by some existing system and going to a new system is that they may have a system where there are one or two computers which are isolated, they are not connected, and they may be using some old software like COBOL and stuff like that, and that is probably fulfilling certain purposes. Like for instance, they may be just doing it for creating the payroll or creating the bills and so on, and they are not talking about any other important requirements. So, now they hear that there is a internet available, there is a local area network which can be made. So, every computer can be connected to every other computer. So, there can be multiple computers in the same organization, and the cost of these smaller computers has gone down considerably. So, replacing the hardware may not be an expensive proposition. It may be a proposition which is which will more than pay for the advantages they get from the new system. So, they may say that now that we have this new internet, LAN and stuff like that, and email and what not, now we would like to also get into that state. Like for instance, a hotel which was originally doing some work primarily with for creating bills and some aspects of the hotel, may say that I would like to now have a web presence. Okay, so that if I have web presence, then anybody from anywhere in the country or the world even can look into my site and book a room in my hotel directly. And so I would like to be able to provide that facility and also confirm immediately and things like that, which previously was not there. So these are kind of new requirements, okay, which essentially is another dimension. You can look at the forms and documents used in the organization, because there are lots of forms and documents which every organization already uses. Like if you look at if you want to computerize, say, the process in a college, like attendance, like examination results processing and student admissions and so on, there will be already some documents which, like when a student enters a college, he or she is supposed to fill up a complete form. That form has got a lot of details, starting with name, age, father's name, mother's name, local guardian, address, phone number, and umpteen things. Sometimes you wonder why all these are required, but there is a form. Okay, this is actually a document which is necessary for some purpose. Sometimes they don't even know why they have collected all that data, but that data is always very often there. So that what the data collected how can that be used? Okay, there are also certain procedure manuals, rule books, and so on. What I mean by that is, if you look at an insurance company, okay, when they go and insure a person for life insurance, then there are a whole set of rules and regulations on what the premium to be charged, okay, what are the restrictions on the policy. Similarly, if you want to go and insure a two-wheeler, the two-wheeler insurance company will have certain rules and regulations, including things like asking what's your age. If you are below 16 or something, they may not insure you, or if you are above 80, they may not insure you. Okay. So there is a certain rules and regulations, so they are called rule books, and there are certain manuals which essentially are used as something which has got to be implemented in the computerized system. Computer-based system has to implement many of these rules which are currently implemented manually. It has got to be automatically implemented by a machine. Reports used by the organization. There are many reports which are there, like by reports I don't really necessarily mean only long reports. A report may be just a result card. That is, at the end of every semester they give you a card giving the grades which you got in that examination, and the cumulative average you have gotten so far. Okay, so that is a report, which you report card you call it. That report has some information. So now if the report has got to be computerized, the computer has to generate that report. Then over and above what the report currently generates, you may generate more, because it may be easy to generate more information. So you look at the existing reports, and organizations always have many reports. And if, as I said, a computer is already being used by by the organization, there is a computer program, and of course programs are notorious in terms of being able to read and understand. Hopefully along with the program there will be some documentation. Very often the documentation will be out of date. It will not be corresponding to the program, because somebody would have changed or debugged the program. But if the programs have got a number of comments and so on, along with the document, you can also run with trial data and see what really happens. Okay. Reading the program does not necessarily mean just going through the program and scanning it, but you can create input data sets and see what the outputs are, what the format is like in terms of the inputs, what kind of reports does it generate, the existing system, and what aspects of that report the current management is not satisfied with. So what improvements are required in this report. So this is existing system has got to be looked at, if there is any. I said interviews are very important. I emphasize that because interviews bring out a lot of information, because everything is not written up. No company will write up everything in terms of procedures, rules, regulations and so on, and people who have been working know a lot of things which they don't put on paper, and they kind of know that, see, and everybody knows it kind of, but then you have to gather that. Use the organization chart of the to see who does what, so that you can get the right information from the right person. Understand the importance of people who operate systems. Okay, as doesn't I am emphasizing it again, clerks, lower level people and so on. The example, the case study example which is given in the book, I have been looking at the example of a hostel, where the hostel chief warden asked the systems people, in this case it may be a company which is doing this work for him, or it may be even their own information technology department, IT department, which may try to do it for the as an exercise, maybe for their students even, okay, whatever. The point is, in the example which I have taken, the warden is the person who asks for computerization. Now the first person to go and talk to is the warden. He is the person who is in the top level, in this case top level management. Now when you talk to that person, you can get an idea of why does he want computerization, okay, and then what is the priority also within his own mind. In the case study, I said the warden has a number of problems he faces. One of the problems he faces is that the mess, or the messes are essentially run in this case by students. It is not contracted out to a contractor, because very often organizations not colleges, some of the better places like IIMs for instance and IITs and so on, the students themselves run the mess to make sure that they get the best deal from the mess. So when the students run the mess, then there are issues in terms of the fact that they have to create a menu, they have to actually collect the bills, and they have to also make sure that the right amount of raw materials available for the cooks to cook for the specified menu, and also they do not depending upon the number of people there, they should not cook more than required or less than required. There are lots of constraints like that. So one of the problems he states is that we are at this time don't know which students are not paid their mess bill. They may be delaying their mess bill payment by more than 15 days, but then the mess bill is delayed. That means there is always a financial crunch. So I would like the system to bring out whenever a student has not paid 5 days beyond the deadline, immediately that list of students should be brought to my notice, so that I can call the student and make sure that the payment is made, okay, or find out the reason why the payment is not made. So that is one of the priorities which he has. And then he talks about also the problem in terms of ordering items. See, ordering items for a mess is reasonably complex in the sense that there are certain items which are ordered on a monthly basis. Like for instance, if you order rice or dal or wheat flour and so on, oil and stuff like that, they are all on almost a monthly basis, because they can be ordered in bulk and you get a cheaper rate if you order in bulk. But certain things like milk, vegetables and so on have to be ordered have to come every day, and some of them are perishable. So you cannot over order or under order. So the other question which another point he wants to make is that currently our system is not able to control the inventory. What is meant by control the inventory is, I must have both perishables and non-perishables the correct amount and not overstocked, particularly perishables. If they are overstocked or understocked, I get into a problem. So there must be some method of working backwards. In other words, knowing how many members are going to be taking food on a given day, and based on that work backwards and find out based on the menu what vegetables are to be ordered and how much are to be ordered, and how much ahead has to be ordered, things like that. So the point is, the chief warden gives the overall perspective. When you ask him, is room booking, there is allotment of rooms to students and keeping track, is that priority? He says no, that is not very great priority at this time, because that is going on manually. It is going reasonably all right, because there is no big turnover from when the student joins the hostel. Almost a whole year the rooms are not changed. There are certain rules saying the rooms cannot be changed easily. So the person is in that room, so it is very easy to keep track of that. So that is not really at this time a priority for a computerization. So the point is, you get a lot of these things from the chief warden, and then of course you have to ask chief warden who is in charge of each. There may be an assistant warden who is in charge of the mess, another assistant warden in charge of the room allotments and so on. Another assistant warden may be in charge of discipline and stuff like that, and then the assistant warden will be assisted in turn by people in the hostel office, like the persons who order all the items, the person who kind of creates the bills, the accountant, and the person who pays the bills whenever something is ordered. So these are lower level people, and of course in this case, as I said, students run the mess. So there are what in this organization there are student mess committee, and there is a mess committee which decides about the nature of the menu and the kind of daily rate. What they normally do is, at the end of the month, they compute the total amount of expenses which have been incurred in ordering all the items and towards the payment to employees and so on, and find out the total expenses for the month. They find out the total number of students who have been members of the mess and divide the expenses by the number of students. And also the students, some students may not have been there for the entire month, because they may have taken about 3 or 4 or 5 days leave, and those 5 days the rebate is given normally in a student run mess. So 5 days rebate. So in other words, you have to get a daily rate, so that based on the number of days the person ate in the mess, you create the bill. Okay. So the daily rate is something which is known to every student. If the daily rate suddenly goes up to 50 rupees, from normal of 40 rupees, then there will be some kind of a dissatisfaction among the students. So, one of the purposes of the mess committee is to keep the daily rate reasonably constant within plus minus 1 or 2 rupees. But at the same time, there will be complaint that the mess rates are so too low, they will be giving potatoes every day or things like that. So, they also have to make sure that the menu is balanced and so on, and then the bills are met. So, the mess committee has got to be interviewed to find out, what is the way in which they compute the daily rate, what way can they essentially, in what way can a computer help for them to kind of even plan a menu. Okay, plan a menu which is not a monotonous menu day after day. Okay, and also it is not a menu which is repeated every week, so that everybody knows is Monday it will be masala dosa, things like that. See, so there is a certain rotation. So these are things which can a computer help. These are questions which the mess committee will be interested in. So in these kinds of information gathering, you talk to a variety of people. In this case, the students, the clerks who are doing all this ordering and payments and so on, and some kind of mess supervisor will be there who is in charge of all the workers and make sure the workers work properly, there is no pilferage and things like that. Okay, because these are important problems as far as supervision is concerned. And then there is the wardens and then the chief warden. So all these levels have got to be looked at. So the organization chart really means starting with the chief warden, the assistant wardens, and then the mess committees, and then the actual office staff, and then the working staff. So these are all the chart you look at, and at each level you try to kind of talk to the persons to find out their perception of what a machine can do. So middle level people have a lot of experience, like because assistant warden may be there for many years, or similarly in a hotel or a hospital there may be a person in the office for 30 years and so on. See, so gather both qualitative and quantitative information. What I mean by qualitative and quantitative is quantitative information is numbers. See, like for instance, you can say how many students are there in the hostel. That's quantitative. You can say there are 150 students in this hostel. Okay, the qualitative may be in terms of saying what is the kind of normal absenteeism, or how many people normally do not eat in the mess regularly. That is kind of qualitative, because you don't know exactly, but certain kind of ideas you will have. And also it is very important to observe the organization work. In other words, just by talking to people and gathering information, you don't get everything out, because people, as I said, there are two problems with talking to people in interviewing. One problem is certain things which they assume you know and they don't tell you. Certain other things which they are not very frank, because they always try to hide some inefficiency which may be there. This is human nature. Okay. So there is a certain amount of things which may be happening which is not stated in so many words. So this is important for the analyst to observe what is going on. Of course, you don't spy, but you, with permission, you effectively see what is the actual flow of documents, how it is being handled today, who handles what, how much time is taken at each level, and things like that. So that is kind of observation. So you get, from the observation, you get certain types of doubts which you can clarify by asking the persons who are supposed to provide you information. So observation is as important. Individual interviews, as talked about, group discussions. Very often group discussions bring out more than individual interviews do. Okay, because in the group each person has got his own perspective. Okay, somebody may say something and somebody else may even contradict. Okay, that it is not really so. So in a group discussion, a lot of, you also find out what are the conflicts or the conflicting requirements which people state, like in a house I talked about. Group discussion in this case is that the entire family gets together, and in a group you find out what really is their priority, what really is their requirement. Okay. So, group discussions help, and several interviews are needed. Single interview will never do, because first time around you get some basic ideas, but second time around you can polish it and ask questions. In other words, at the end of first time around you may have a lot of doubts which you can kind of clarify in a later round, because normally the interviews cannot be too long. So, you got to keep the interviews short, and so you can go more often, but keep them all short. So, plan. What is the plan to interview? Make a list of people to be interviewed and what order. Like I said, you go to chief warden first and assistant wardens, and then go to these mess students, mess committee secretary and the other students in the mess committee, and then the accountants and all that. See, so there is a certain look at all the order. Plan and note down the list of questions to be asked. And before you go to any person, you try to list all the questions you want to ask, because but then you may not know all the all of it, but at least some basic questions. If there is an existing system which you already looked at and you knew what the system is doing, then some of the questions you may ask is what are you not satisfied with this? What are the parts which are really not working very well? So, these are the questions you may like to ask. So, as I said, several interviews to clarify doubts and interview groups as it is appropriate. The technique, these are all what I would say common sense, and one does not have to say that again and again. But the reason I am stating that is many of you, when you go out of college, are new to the field. You are not really done this kind of interviewing when you are in college. So, you have to really understand what this interview process really means in real life. Okay? And so, in real life, people expect you to make appointments. That is, when you want to meet somebody at 10:30, you tell the person, can I come at 10:30? And you also tell the person may ask you, how long do I have to give you? Particularly if it is a top manager, he may not have a lot of time, and if you say 1 hour, he may say no, it is not possible, or he will put you off. If you say 20 minutes or 15 minutes, the person may say all right, 15-20 minutes is okay. So, you really have to kind of allot a time based on the level of the person in the organization. The higher the level, the shorter is the time, and the more precise your question should be. Okay. Read the background material before you go about the company, about the organization, and so on. Okay. Because what I mean by background material is, if you are going to kind of computerize a hospital or a hotel, or say a manufacturing company or a retail company and so on, they have a lot of information about their company, and that information is in documented form, and that should be read. So, you get some kind of an idea. When you go for an interview, state the purpose. What is it that you want from the person? Okay, and be punctual. And very often it turns out that people are not punctual, particularly in our country, and this is not accepted. Particularly if you are going to be you see, many companies in India outsource. They are outsourcing places. In other words, many of the contracts for Indian companies come from outside India, like Japan, like USA, Europe, and so on. There, people are much more punctual, particularly Japanese. They are very, very, very punctual. Even their trains, if it says 10, 15, 30 seconds, it will leave at 30 seconds exactly, not 1 second late, 1 second early. Okay. They are very, very concerned about their punctuality. That is also true about most European and American companies. So, punctuality is important, and you got to pay attention, of course. I mean, that is obvious. When somebody is talking to you, you cannot let your mind wander and not attend. And don't use computer jargon. In other words, those people are not computer people. Don't use what I mean by jargon is you say I will use JavaScript. So what is JavaScript? You know, it is it doesn't mean a thing to him. Okay, and so or use some acronym. So you are saying that I am going to use an ADSL modem. What's an ADSL modem? What does many people don't even know what the expansion of ADSL is. They just use it mechanically. Okay, so the point really is don't use such jargon. Even the jargon like modem, many people may not understand what a modem is, say, and so you have to really say that it's a method of connecting your machine to the internet. Some black box is required to connect your computer to the internet, and so I am only that black box I will provide, things like that. Okay, and you don't use jargon. Okay. And as I said, qualitative and quantitative information, discriminate between essential and desirable requirements. Okay. Very often what is considered essential, what is considered desirable is not very clearly stated. Like in the case of a hostel, an essential requirement is that I have to collect the bills in time. A desirable requirement may be that I would like to kind of at the same time, by doing this I would like to be able to save some money or things like that, or interest and so on. But then there is our primary objective or primary advantage is to look at meet the essential requirements, and if you can meet the desirable requirements, you can meet the desirable requirements. That is something which is but then essential has got to be met first. Okay. Essential requirement in this case may be that on the 5th day he was delaying his bill payment. On the 5th day precisely exception report should come to me saying that these people have not paid. Okay. A desirable maybe I would like to get a list of habitual offenders. There are people who month after month after month are giving late, clearing their dues late. Okay, that is desirable. Because that information may be used to try to find out why this person is a habitual offender. There may be a reason, but it's a desirable thing. But the essential thing is to get this report month after month and state what you understand by what he said and get his confirmation. Do not unnecessarily prolong the interview. See, if you prolong the interview, people both you can actually see that interview is getting prolonged by this guy suddenly getting to a phone and trying to phone or losing attention and stuff like that. And summarize the information gathered and get it checked by the interviewee. In other words, there are two ways in which you can summarize. At the end of that half an hour, you can kind of summarize what you understood and there is agreement, or you can just keep notes. But very often when you keep notes, you have to take permission of the person. I am keeping notes. And nowadays they even keep a little tape recorder, portable tape recorder, and record the interview. Some people don't like to be recorded, but you have to, once you get permission for tape recording the interview, you tape record the interview, in which both your questions and his answers will be there. And then you go back, review this tape recorded interview and create a summary of what you understood or what is the information you gathered during that interview process. And then that can be sent as a typed document to the person whom you interviewed with requesting his comments or her comments. And so, if they say everything is fine, they can sign and return it to you. So, you also have a documentation that what you understood is what also they thought they said. But if they disagree, they can scratch off some of those things and then again say this is not what I said, there is something else. So, you can kind of add a note. Okay. So, this is important to have some kind of a, if possible, a written agreement from about what you understood, and most people will give it. I mean, they are not, because it is important at that stage, because it is always good to clear doubts early in the game than later in the game. See, one of the points which is made again and again and again in the design of information systems, computer based information systems, is the later you make an error, the later you understand that the error has been made in an earlier phase, the more expensive is it to fix that error, and more time consuming is that fixation. Okay. So, the point is, it is better to find the errors when they occur, rather than wait later on and find out you made an error. So, it is at every stage you really have to kind of remove the errors which may be there. In fact, the so called spiral method which I talk about, the primary aim of the spiral method is to go back to try to find out any errors are made at each step, so that you can correct it, rather than the so called waterfall method, which till you work till the end, wait till the end before you correct. Okay. So, this is only two different ways of looking at the same thing. In other words, in the method I gave, the method is primarily that step by step, at the end of each step you review, and you second step also you review second step, but you do not stop there, you also go back and re-review the first step. Okay. So, that is essentially the point. Checking at each stage is important. Questionnaires are useful for data collection. That is, you clear a questionnaire and then give this questionnaire to the user to fill up, but people do not like to give, fill up questionnaire. Some questionnaire comes to you by mail, you will never fill it up, even if they give you a gift and things like that. So, if it is very short, 10 questions, you will fill it up, but by and large they will not fill it up. It is very difficult to get questionnaires filled up. Also, questionnaires give you only the quantitative information, they do not give you qualitative information. So, there are several follow-up personal interviews are required. So, the questionnaire is only maybe a preliminary kind of a thing, where you enumerate the objectives the data need to be and how to meet these objectives. Okay. So, I will say a little bit more about questionnaires next time, and also continue with this discussion of information gathering techniques in the next lecture. Thank you.